And for those of you who brought the kiddos with you today, we're taking it's a rest and reset month. And so if you brought your kiddos in the room, thanks for bringing them. If they're a little rambunctious, that's okay. I've got kids as well. But thanks for bringing them. Go ahead and find your seats, and we're going to jump into the Bible today. If you are new to the church, or if you haven't met me yet, my name is Nick. I'm one of the pastors here. I'm so excited to open up the Bible, God's Word, and bring a message for you today. So if you have a Bible, you can open it up to Matthew chapter 11. If you're watching from home, if you're driving and listening, if you're on vacation or something, we'll put most of the verses up on the screen. And if you want to grab one of the Bibles in front of you, you didn't bring your own, that's fine. We're going to be on page 682. So Matthew 11 and page number 682. And so here's the question you were just asked to answer. What was your most favorite or your least favorite class back in school? Now, if I was a betting man, I'm not really a betting man, but if I was a betting man, I would bet that most of you said your most favorite class in school was some kind of interesting class. Your teacher, you really enjoyed your teacher, it was engaging, you felt like what you were learning actually mattered. It wasn't something that, you know, when you turn 18 and graduate, you're never going to use this again. It was something that was interesting. And I'll bet that whatever class you chose as your least favorite class was something that was just mind-numbingly boring. That might be the case. Maybe you chose a boring class for your favorite class and a hard class for your most favorite class. I don't know, but that was certainly the case for me. My favorite classes growing up were science classes. A lot of us took, okay, somebody chose science. I can see by the facial expression here. Earth science, how the plates move around and the lava and stuff. Those were my favorite classes. Physics and biology. You know, my teachers brought in little frogs and we had to chop the frogs and pull the stuff out. Y'all did that, right? So I enjoyed the science classes. They were hard classes. I had to study a lot, but they were my favorite. They were very interesting. My least favorite class, I'm not going to say what the class was because we have a lot of teachers at our church. And they teach a lot of subjects. And so no matter what subject I say, even an obscure one like typing or something, there's going to be someone in here that teaches that. So I'm not going to say what it is because you'll get a lot of glares. But my least favorite class was actually my easiest class, but it was just boring. Incredibly boring. You know, I had this game I would play with myself to pass the time. I would watch the clock on the wall just tick, tick, tick. And then sometimes I would look away and I would count in my head to 2 minutes or 3 minutes and I would look back to see how accurate I was. Have any of you ever done that before? Sometimes time would go backwards. It was like a Doctor Who moment. I don't know how that happened, but I had all the ceiling tiles. Like I knew how many ceiling tiles were in the room. I had counted all the carpet tiles, if it was a room with carpet tiles. It was an exciting day in class. If there was a fly on the loose or an ant on the wall, it provided some form of entertainment. That was the most interesting class for me. Not because it was easy, but just because it was so easy and maybe I felt like I wasn't going to use it in life. It was just depleting, right? Those classes that are depleting were your least favorite. Sorry, I forgot we have kids in the room. They were the most meh classes. They were skibbity toilet. Those were the classes that were my least favorite. It's because you know, all of us have been kids at some point, or there's kids in the room now. You know how it is as a kid. When you're bored, it's like the Earth's gravity is heavier. You know, it's like all your muscles begin to kind of deteriorate. You know, like when you're in the grocery store with your mom and she's like looking at which can of whatever to get, and it's like you were just running laps in the parking lot, but now you just can't stand up, you know. It's like, it's weary. Your body just kind of breaks down when you're incredibly bored. Some of you kids are bored with me right now. But here's something that Jesus had something to say about this. Here's what he said. He said that if we choose to follow him, that he will give us rest. And it wasn't a boring kind of rest, because just flipping through Netflix, that's kind of boring, right? He wasn't talking about that kind of rest. What he says is the rest that he promises us is not a rest from work, but a rest from, you know, just kind of slump your body over, the rest from weariness. It wasn't a rest necessarily from busyness. We're still going to be busy. Dr. Kapoor, man, I was getting tired just listening to the guy, all the stuff that he's been doing. It's not a rest from busyness, but a rest from that burden that you can feel sometimes. That's the kind of rest that he promises us. And here's what he says. Well, look at the screen up here. Matthew 11:25. At that time, Jesus said, I praise you, Father. He starts a prayer. Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and the learned and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for this is what you were pleased to do. All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father. No one knows the Father except the Son, and to those whom the Son has chosen to reveal him. And then he says, come to me. This is Sherry read this verse a second ago. He said, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So Jesus makes an interesting promise here. He says that if you choose to orient your entire life around me, I will give you rest. And rest comes up twice in that verse. Actually, in verse 28, it's a verb. In the original language, Jesus spoke it. So he says, if you come to me, I will rest you. I will cause rest. I will make rest. I will rest you if you come and follow me. Which begs the question, how in the world does following Jesus cause you rest? Imagine going to do a sleep study or something, and the sleep expert says, you know what you really need? You really need Jesus. I mean, would you be satisfied with that answer? Like, how does following Jesus bring you rest? I mean, it's very popular on a Hallmark card, but what does it really mean? Well, what we're going to see today is that the kind of rest Jesus promises here is not a life of ease, okay? We're made in God's image. We're meant to represent God. We're the salt of the world, he says. We're meant to bring change and share the gospel and live out the gospel, bring dead situations to life. I mean, this is not just a life of ease. It's a different kind of rest. And here's what he means by this. So here's my outline today. How does following Jesus give me rest? Well, we get the ability to choose rest because we can trust God. And so here, he kind of argues two different points in this passage. He says, you have to realize if you come and follow me that somebody else is in charge. Come to me, someone else is in charge. Someone's got to keep the world spinning, and it's not you. You can try, but you're not going to do much good keeping the world spinning. Somebody else is in charge of that stuff. And then secondly, it's a different kind of work. Scripture teaches us that everybody's carrying some kind of yoke, and if you don't know what a yoke is, we'll talk about that. I got pictures and all kinds of fun stuff. But he says, take my yoke upon you. It's a different kind of work. Here's what Isaiah 57:20 reads. Those who reject me are like the restless sea, which is never still, but continually churns up mud and dirt. Those who reject God, they're restless. And so we're going to see that if you come and follow Jesus, over the course of time, you'll learn that he will make you rest. He will cause rest in your life, okay? So let's look at that first point. Someone else is in charge. We must realize someone else is in charge. Look at verse 27 and verse number 28. We'll put it back up on the screen here. Jesus says, all things have been committed to me by my Father. And then he says, come to me, all who are weary and burdened. I will give you rest. He uses that pronoun for himself. Come to me. There's a lot of people out there that we can follow, okay? And earlier in this text, Jesus is responding to a question. Somebody asked him a question earlier in this chapter, and I didn't want to read the whole chapter. It's quite long. It's quite lengthy. But here's what somebody asked him early on in the chapter that led to all this dialogue. Okay, look back at verse number 3. We'll put it up on the screen if you don't have a Bible. Someone asked him, are you the one who's to come, or should we expect someone else? Everyone wants someone to follow. We all want someone to follow. To be human is to want someone to follow. We're all looking for some different person to follow. And oftentimes it's political leaders, it's some kind of candidate. And this has always been the case, by the way. I've heard different people over the last couple of years say, Nick, I feel like politics is out of control. I feel like people have just gone crazy for different candidates. I mean, on 743, there's like this shrine built for one of the candidates, a cutout, and there's lights and flags and a truck they painted. Sorry if I offended anybody, but I don't know, when your days are numbered, you feel like you can say what you want, right? So, but why do we have these shrines built to these? I mean, I feel like politics is out of control these days. What's happening? And my response is, it's kind of always been this way. I mean, nations have always printed money and stamped coins with people's faces on them. And even back in ancient days, they would build these statues. They would literally worship their political leader and burn incense and give prayers and do rituals and stuff to their, I mean, if anything, we're tamed down from the ancient world. People have always looked for someone to follow and have oriented their life around following some kind of candidate or political party. There have always been influencers. I know it's Taylor Swift and Mr. Beast and people like that, but there have always been people that have attracted crowds to follow them. There's always someone to follow. And so as Jesus is talking about this, here's what he says in verse 16. He keeps going in this dialogue. He says, to what can I compare this generation? By the way, all the kids in the room and teenagers too. So if you're 18 or if you're 20 or younger, have you ever heard somebody say, "Oh, kids these days. Oh, kids don't understand work. They don't Yeah, have you ever heard that? Raise your hand if you're under 20. If you heard somebody pick on you ever heard that? People have always picked on every generation. They picked on my generation. This generation is always the worst, right? That's always been the case. It's because people are pretty much the same. Here's what Jesus says. This generation, That's long gone by now. He said, they're like children sitting in the marketplace. They're calling out to others, we played the pipe for you and you didn't dance. We sang a dirge and you didn't mourn. Jesus is saying, sometimes I feel like I'm in the marketplace, strumming, I'm playing my flute and nobody's dancing. They're all infatuated with their devices, selling things in the marketplace. They didn't have iPhones, but there was something to be addicted to in those days. People are always distracted by all these things, and I feel I'm playing my flute and nobody wants to follow me. That's what Jesus is saying. There's always somebody to follow. Always somebody to follow. I'll give you a case study. Jesus is saying that if you choose to follow me instead of that political person, that influencer, that thing, that shiny thing that catches your attention, if you follow me, I will eliminate the restlessness. I will give you rest. And I'll give you a case study, okay? Some of you have read, like we're in the book of Matthew. It's a really long letter in the Bible. Some of you have read the whole thing. And have you ever noticed, if you follow the life of the disciples, they were the first ones to follow Jesus. If you don't know what that word means, they were the first ones to follow. And so if you follow the life of the disciples early on, like they're always doubtful. Jesus makes some prediction and they go in the corner, hey, he's not serious, is he? They're always full of doubt. They're always full of fear. It seems like every chapter of the Gospels, there's a storm or an antagonistic person or a crowd that's swarming. There's always something they're fearful of. And they're always fearful of something. They're always filled with fear, with doubt, with unbelief. And then if you notice, after they follow Jesus for like 3 years or more, it's like nothing bothers them anymore at all. I mean, they're threatened within their life and they're like, come at me, bro. I mean, the Roman police come up to them and say, you have got to stop talking about Jesus. You're causing riots. You have got to stop presenting this gospel. And they're like, no. Like nothing, they have utmost confidence. Nothing phases them. Life could be crumbling down. They're threatened with prison and persecution and like, whatever. They're total. How did they find that rest? It's because they figured out that they're not in charge. What if this doesn't work? Well, it's not really up to me. I'm not really the one keeping the world spinning here. The rest that you have when you follow Jesus is a rest of realizing that you're not in control. You're accepting that someone else is in control. You're still working, but someone else is in control. Here's a quote that I love. I think we got it. I was late to get this we got it. I was late to get this up, so thanks for putting that up. I have no idea how to say this dude's first name, but Savat is how you say his last name. So Mr. Savat, here's what he says. He's a Jewish man. He says, every seventh day, he's writing about the Sabbath. Maybe you've heard the term Sabbath before. It's in the Old Testament. Every seventh day, the Israelite is to renounce dominion over time and thereby renounce autonomy and recognize God's dominion over time and thus over himself. Keeping the Sabbath is an acceptance of the sovereignty of God. I mean, there are Jewish people who have been taking 24 hours off of work every week for like thousands of years. How do they do it? Well, they don't have more time than us. They choose to. They just choose to. They've learned over the course of time that they're not in control of time. Now, us Westerners, we kind of feel like we control time. I'm going to see if I can make time. I'm going to create time. I'm going to invest my time. It's like I own time. No. Time kind of owns me. I'm not. But we try to control our time. I'm going to try to make time. I'm going to pencil you in. When you rest in God, there's an acceptance that you don't own time. God's in charge of these things. How do they find 24 hours to take off? Well, they have the same amount of time that we do. They just choose to trust God. And if you don't work for those 24 hours, you'll be okay. But a lot of us, it's hard for us to realize that things are going to be okay. So let me ask you a question. If you really, I know in your head you believe this, but in your heart, if you really believed that God was in charge, if you really believed that God was in charge and not you, how would that change your behavior? Would you worry less about money and be more willing to give generously to other things? If you really believe God was in control, would you feel the freedom to work less and maybe volunteer more, grab a pamphlet from one of the tables out in the lobby there? Would you be less concerned about what you're accomplishing and more concerned with the person that you're becoming? If you really believe that God was in charge and not you, would this affect you? Would you be less conscientious of your productivity and more willing to slow down and notice others? What would happen if you really believed that, if you actually believed that God was in charge of time and your well-being and not yourself? How would that really change things? Well, Jesus says, come to me and I will give you rest. So how does following Jesus give me rest? Well, first off, it's a recognition that someone else is in charge. That's what he says in verse 28. Come to me. There's other people to go to, but come to me and I will give you rest. And here's the second thing he says. He says, there's a different kind of work I want to give you. He says, take my yoke. There's a lot of yokes. We'll talk about that. He says, take my yoke. It's a different kind of work. Look at what he says in verse 29. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in spirit, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Today's message is about going yoke. I'm just offending everybody today. Okay, so some of you don't know what a yoke is, because it's kind of a foreign term. It comes from a different season of work before the Industrial Revolution or something like that. I don't know. I don't know when yokes started going out of business. How many of you have friends or maybe family members that are in the plain communities, Amish communities, or friends in the Mennonite communities? Any of you? Oh, okay, a couple of hands. So actually, I thought less of you than I thought. But we do have. So if you're familiar, if you have friends that are in the plain communities, you're probably used to seeing yokes. So here's a picture of a yoke that I brought along. It's basically this metal or wooden this thing that would go across an animal's shoulders. And you could tie weight to it, like a plow or something like that, and it would help that animal carry some kind of load for you. Or even back in the ancient days, sometimes people would wear a yoke over their shoulder. Now, Jesus isn't offering us a physical yoke, but the word yoke represented a workload. It represented an expectation that someone else has strapped something to your shoulders, and you're stuck with this. And according to Scripture, everybody has some kind of yoke. Here's a few different examples of the word yoke used in the Bible. In Acts 15, the yoke of religion is an example. In 1 Timothy 6, the yoke of slavery. If you have to sell yourself into slavery to provide for your family, you're accepting someone tying a yoke upon you. It's a burden upon you. There's the yoke of the king, Jeremiah 27. Whatever the king says, you got to follow. He puts a yoke, a burden, whatever he wants to do. You're a part of that society. There's a yoke on you. There's the yoke of taxes. You guys pay your taxes, right? It feels like a yoke. Some of y'all are like, yeah, I pay taxes. Sales tax. No. So there's a yoke that all of us have on our shoulders. It's a feeling that we have to make somebody happy. Many of you have a yoke of work. You have to make your boss, your company happy. There's a yoke, there's a burden, that's placed upon you. Others of you, maybe your kids in the room, teenagers, you feel this yoke of a sports team that's upon you. It started out fun in Little League, and now everybody's talking about scholarships, and you got to travel to different states to do travel sports and competitions and stuff, and it feels less fun and more like a yoke. Some of you feel the yoke of your online presence even. All right? Just a couple of months ago, I had a meeting on Zoom with someone who's an author. He's written a couple of books, and I was asking him, hey, if I ever had an idea to write a book, what would you suggest I do? And he instantly said, how many followers do you have? How many social media, whatever do you have? Do you have people following your blog? You got to get your subscriptions up. And I was just exhausted talking to him. I was like, I got to self-promote just to write. The content of my book doesn't matter as many followers as I have. It's just exhausting, right? And some of you, maybe you have an expectation of yourself on your shoulders. It's maybe your online presence is driven by yourself. Nobody else cares how many likes and shares and swipes you get, but you follow that, and it feels like a yoke that's on you. All of us, whether somebody else gives it or it's our own expectations, we have a yoke on our shoulders. And the Scripture says that all of us carry some kind of yoke like that. Jesus is saying, take my yoke upon you. Because my yoke, Jesus says, is easier. It's lighter. It's a lot of work. It's not a freedom from busyness, but it's a lighter yoke that you can follow. Some of you felt the yoke of religion placed upon you. In fact, in the context here, that's what Jesus is talking about. Because right in chapter number 12, the very next chapter, there's this thing that goes on with the religious preachers, the religious leaders of his day. They were called Pharisees. Here's what he says in chapter 12. The scribes and the Pharisees don't do what they do because they don't practice what they preach. They tie up heavy loads that are hard to carry and put them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Some of you maybe come from church backgrounds where religion was a yoke. I mean, I know that it wasn't everybody's background, but it was certainly my background. Man, when I was growing up, we were at different church functions 5 different times a week. Unless it was revival week, then it was like 9 times a week. And for some reason, I always felt guilty, like I wasn't doing enough, like I wasn't pleasing God enough. That carried on into my pastoral ministry. When I first became a preacher, I kind of carried that mindset on, and I would wear my suits, and I would have my ties, and I would literally punch the pulpit, and I was trying to make people feel guilty. And it was 3 years of God working in my heart and saying, no, my yoke isn't to make you feel like I'm mad at you all the time. And I kind of had to work through that and realize that what God wants us to do is, it should feel light. It should not feel burdensome, okay? And so listen, if you're a Christian and you feel as if following Jesus is wearisome, it's a burden, I would encourage you to book a meeting with a pastor and talk about this. Okay, so if any of these statements are true of you, I encourage you to schedule an hour with a pastor you know. If you feel as though God is mad at you, if you feel shameful as if God is deeply just disappointed in you, if you feel perpetually guilty that you aren't doing enough to please God, if these are some of the feelings that you feel, I encourage you to schedule an appointment with a pastor to talk through why. There's different reasons why you may be feeling that. But if following Jesus is not joyful, if following Jesus is burdensome, you may not be doing it right. Because Jesus says, my yoke, compared to the Pharisees or any other yoke, is easy. Okay? Let me give you an illustration. Let me show you this. I'm going to show you a picture of my first truck. I own a car now, unfortunately. One day I hope to own a truck again. But this was one of my first trucks, okay? It was a Ford Ranger. I had a Frontier. I wrecked that very quickly before I could even get a picture of it. This was my next truck, Ford Ranger. For some reason, I got in my head that I really wanted surround sound. I mean, it was one of those trucks that I didn't really have a back seat, but for some reason I wanted surround sound. The speaker here wasn't good enough. I wanted one here as well, and here as well. And so I pulled the thing apart. It was the older trucks, you can actually work on them. Today's cars, you can't do anything. They're all mechanicalized or whatever. It's super frustrating. But I was able to pull things apart, and I didn't have YouTube back then. I don't know when it was invented, but this wasn't a thing. So I just kind of had to figure it out. I'm slicing stuff. I'm twisting things together. My stepdad did electrical work, so he taught me a couple things. And I added some speakers that I got from Goodwill or something to my truck. Now, I did this wrong a couple times. I had to kind of figure it out, right, and splice again. Now, one of the times that I did this, I noticed that there were some songs that would play, and it would go silent during part of the song, and later on, it would come back. Or I would hear music but not singing, or I would hear singing and not music. And I found out why. Do any of you have earbuds, like Beats or something like that? Any of you? Okay, a bunch of you have, or AirPods or something like that. A lot of you have those. Have you noticed that sometimes the musicians, they'll make one side sound something and the other? I found out that I had twisted the wire so that it was all like one side. So if somebody on the right side, I don't know how they do this, but if someone was singing on the right side, it would tune out, and vice versa. Okay? And so I had to redo it. Here's why I bring all that up. What would happen if the expectations that others have on you, the expectations that you have on yourself, what if you were able to turn that volume down? And the expectations that God has for you, you were able to turn that up. What would that do to you? If you could turn these down and you could turn this one up, how would that change your behavior? If you could adjust the volume on the yokes that you're carrying right now, would you feel less guilty and more excited about serving God? Would you take more risks with people? Would you feel less worried about being at practice every night and more excited about, man, I'm going to make my core group a priority? I'm just giving examples. Like, well, what would happen if all the expectations other people or yourself have on you, if you could turn that down and you could just turn up the expectations God has for you? How would that change your life? Just to recognize that yoke. Following Jesus gives me the opportunity to choose rest, because someone else is in charge and it's a different kind of work. One more quote that I want to show you. This is from a book called The Emotional Intelligence of Jesus. The writer says, and the whole book's about this, but the writer says one comment that I like. He says, whether confronted by crowds or opponents or unhappy family members, none of us have those, but when confronted by these things, Jesus always seems in possession of himself, at rest, at peace is another way that you could say that. He was always optimistic about the future, even when he knew that the end of his life would come. He had an abundance mindset, not a scarcity mindset. He seemed to always have a growth mindset, not a fixed mindset. He wasn't fearful about the future. He was confident about the future. He was authentic. He had no problem being himself. How was Jesus, when confronted by all kinds of hardship, how was he able to always seem at peace with himself and at rest with himself? On busy and stressful days, he always had time to stop and talk to someone that needed to be talked to. Even in the busyness, the stress of things, he always was able to just change plans and do what was important. How did he get that? Think about this for a second. The Son of God traveled at a 3-mile-an-hour pace. Just think about that. I want you to imagine for a second. Imagine for the next week, you were only allowed to travel at a maximum of 3 miles per hour. That's the average walking speed of a human being. If you were only able to go at 3 miles per hour for the next week, what would that do to you? drive you nuts. But the Son of God traveled at a 3-mile-an-hour pace everywhere he went. And he was totally at peace with it. How is that? Jesus says, my yoke is easy, my yoke is light. And when you recognize that God is in charge, hey, he's giving you 24 hours a day. You got to sleep 6 to 8 of them. I mean, it's going to be okay, right? Even despite the stress that we have all the time. I'll bet that if we learned to trust God more, we would sleep better. I bet we would make better decisions. I bet we would take more risks. I bet we would worry less. I bet it would give us more direction and purpose in our life if we would learn to trust him more and to not feel weary, but to feel the rest that he offers. I hope that's helpful for you. Before we leave today, thank you for your kind attention. Let me pray for you. Let's pray together. Father, you have invited us to follow you, and it's a hard work. Following you it's a hard thing to do. It's not an easy thing to do. But Lord, it is a burden that is lighter than other expectations that we can place on ourselves or that others can place on us. I pray that over the course of time, I mean, nobody can magically flip a switch and live this out Monday, but I pray that all of us would just meditate on this, and over the course of time, as we continue to follow you and give our lives to you, that we would learn what it means to relinquish the control that we try to have over our time and over our life, and that we would trust you more fully and take steps in our life to prove that no, I'm going to trust God and I'm not going to fill my schedule and live up to this standard. I pray that we would just learn to trust you on a regular basis. So give us that freedom as we learn this.